For our 23rd wedding anniversary, my husband decided to book us a trip to Mauritius. We'd heard stories of this idyllic destination, a tropical paradise renowned for its pristine beaches where the water glistens and the romance rules. And due to some business meetings, we decided to kill two birds with one stone, an excellent and economical approach to romance. I left the responsibility of booking the trip in his capable hands. What could go wrong, I thought, in this perfect place? Now, I don't know if you've noticed yet, but our imagined view of life, experiences, holidays, and how we think it should go is often very different from how things really go. The relationship that you prayed for so long, you poured your heart out to God, asking for a spouse, can also be that relationship that tests you in ways you never expected. The miracle baby, the miracle baby that was prophesied is the same baby that keeps you up all night when they are young and on your knees when they are older. The dream job that you never ever thought possible comes with people and pressures that rob you of your peace very quickly. And the calling from God that is so precious and personal and so full of promise can leave you feeling alone, sometimes abandoned, stretched, and undone in ways that you never ever expected. And this is real life, not the imaginary dream that we wish and hope for, but the real life version. Our real life version of our Mauritius experience was not like the Instagrammable photographs. We arrived at the airport and we taxied to the hotel. And from the moment we arrived at the resort, we realized that our imagined version was going to be very different from our real experience. The hotel was somewhat cramped and gloomy. The music was loud, and so were the people. The room was small, and the once white sheets were now a dull gray. Sand was on the tiles of the floor, along with other non-mentionable objects from the previous participants, and years of wear and tear had begun to creep up in the corners of the room. The headboard had been removed, leaving a stark look, and we both gritted our teeth, digging deep, trying not to meet each other's disappointed eyes. Once the porter had left, we held on to a sliver of hope. We had requested a quiet room with a view of the tropical paradise, the pristine beach, where the water glistens so that romance could rule. And with great anticipations, we opened the curtains and we slid open the doors, only to be hit not by the glorious smell of the ocean as we expected, but the very distinct smell of second-hand shellfish braai. And to top it off, right in the middle of our view was a gazebo with flashing green and purple neon lights, proudly advertising the weekly shellfish extravaganza, a substance that my husband just happens to be highly allergic to. It was complete with a long queue of people and loud music just within a couple meters of our room. But because we are the resilient people that we are, and we have learned to bounce back and to dig deep and to always look at the bright side of life, we were determined not to let our circumstances get the better of us. And our grand solution to this predicament that we were in, the smell, the noise, and the heat, although somewhat ludicrous when looking back and preparing for this today, was if we could just find a fan. A fan would get us out of all of the problems for the night. A fan would get us through to the morning successfully. The hotel reception was quite surprised by our request, but assured us that there was a shopping center within walking distance. And so we dashed off before closing time and managed to find one last fan in stock. It was the large, unportable type that gets mounted to a wall. We would make it work, we said. And with our new purchase hoisted on Robin's shoulder, we made our way back to the hotel. How many of your holidays have gone like this, guys? As fate would have it, at that moment, the heavens opened and it began to rain. Of course, we did not have an umbrella, but we did have a fan. And at this point, I want you to get the full picture. We're walking up the middle of the road. We had attracted a small pack of dogs who were circling on the sidewalk. If you've been to Mauritius, you know the dogs that gather. And they were quietly following us home, clearly due to our friendly countenance at this point. And for some bizarre reason that I can't quite explain, in this preposterous situation, not quite like the Instagrammable photographs, and with disappointment at its max, we looked at each other and we began to laugh. That deep, belly-aching laugh that comes from deep within you, that the more you experience it, the richer the experience becomes. Having completely lost our sense of humor at this point, we were somehow, undeservedly, unexpectedly surprised by joy. C.S. Lewis once said, "There are a billion things that can steal our joy, but only one source from which we can receive it." And interestingly, psychologists say that joy adds to our mental and physical well-being. Imagine that. Because it triggers changes in our body and in our brain. Joy brings life. Joy leaves us knowing that things are going to be okay, even when nothing has changed. And we need more joy. Now, joy is difficult to describe in its truest form. And if you have ever experienced it, that deep, uncontainable, unfathomable joy, you will know that it's much more than just a feeling. Joy is a response to something. It is a response to a state of affairs that is not always the real state of affairs. It's a response to something that doesn't always match your current situation. My experience with joy is that joy can show up when things are going well and life is good and it's easy flow. But my experience with joy is that joy is not limited to good circumstances. Joy does not rely on what is happening around you. Joy often shows up in oppression and in suffering rather than in plenty. Because joy is the presence of a person, and his name is Jesus. In John chapter 15:11, when Jesus prepared his disciples for what would be the most disorienting, painful, and unexpected season of their lives, where everything that they had imagined, their ideal outcome, was going to be very different from their real experience of what they believed the kingdom coming would look like. He spoke these words, "I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." My joy in you makes your joy complete. In other words, you will have joy, and the source of your joy is not going to be your mission. It is not going to be your miracles. It is not even going to be your ministry. And it's not going to be your great moments. The source of your joy is going to be Jesus. The implication here is profound and so simple. You cannot manufacture joy. You can't stir it up by trying harder. It's not self-produced. It is God-given. Do you remember when Paul and Barnabas were in that really awkward situation? They had just been thrown out of a city for preaching Jesus. In Acts chapter 13, 15, they were misunderstood, rejected, and expelled from the city. And then we see this most surprising line, perhaps in the 75% of the seed that didn't take root. And the disciples were filled with joy and the Holy Spirit. Notice the order of these words. Joy didn't wait for comfort. It does not wait for the perfect conditions. Joy surprisingly showed up in the middle of the persecution. How's your persecution going? How often are you being surprised by joy? In Galatians 5:22, we see that joy is the fruit of the Spirit. Notice it does not say that joy is the fruit of a successful performance. Joy is not the fruit of good circumstances. N.T. Wright said, "We were made for joy, but we settle for pleasure." And perhaps it's important to distinguish between the two. Pleasure depends on what is happening around us, a Mauritius holiday that goes well. Pleasure also fades. Joy is a gift from God. It surprises us in every season. It sustains us beyond our circumstances. And joy is not based on what might change. Joy is based on the one who doesn't. And C.S. Lewis put it even more beautifully, and he said, "I doubt whether anyone who has tasted it, joy, would ever be, if both were in his power, exchange it for all the pleasures in the world." But then joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is. Perhaps that's why we settle for pleasure. Now, if there's ever a biblical example of this, it's captured in the book of Philippians. Written by Paul, most likely in a prison from Rome, certainly no pleasures in the vicinity, no grey sheets, no removed headboard, no mole creeping at the corner of the room that he was disappointed in. And yet Philippians is called the epistle of joy, written from the prison and overflowing in rejoicing. As I looked at Philippians in the last few weeks in preparation for this, my thought was this: if Paul could be surprised by joy in the prison, don't start being surprised if joy shows up in your pressure. Not after the breakthrough, but before it. Because joy is not the result of something. Joy is the presence of someone. Paul expresses his joy in many ways in this letter, and there were unlimited numbers that I could go with. I've chosen a little bit of alliteration in remembrance of George. Do you remember 2 years ago, be like George? George, we miss you. But we're going to start with the first that appears in his introduction, and I've called it Paul's expression of compassionate joy, or simply joy rooted in relationships. Philippians chapter 1, 3 through 5. Notice what Paul writes about the people that he's in ministry with, the 25% that he sowed the seed with. I thank my God every time I remember you. Tell me the truth this morning. Do you really thank God every time you remember everybody in your church? In, in all my prayers for you, in all my prayers for you, I always pray with joy. Jesus, please make them leave. Because of your partnership in the gospel from this day until now. Notice that Paul expresses his joy that is found in his relationships. It's no surprise because you know what? God created you for connection. So it shouldn't be surprising that joy is not found in isolation. Come out of hiding and join the pack. It's rooted in connection, and Paul found joy in his relationships. The problem, though, is that relationships and even partnerships in ministry are a tad tricky. They're different from the imagined ideal version that we hope for. They're more like the real life one because they're people just like you. And for anyone that cares deeply about their relationships and is deeply invested in them, for anyone that cares about people and is deeply invested in them, one of the greatest threats to compassionate joy is this concept that has been identified in the social science research called compassion fatigue. Mark has already introduced it very kindly. Compassion fatigue is simply known as the cost of caring. It's been identified and studied and is common among people that care for people. Clergy is on the list of the statistics of who compassion fatigue hits. It is a state of exhaustion and dysfunction biologically, psychologically, and socially as a result of prolonged exposure to compassion stress and all it invokes. I have a 45-minute talk on the research of compassion fatigue, but I think it's best summed up in this one illustration that is going to come up on the screen on slide 16. Do you ever feel like this? Perhaps we could do an example of it. Not to worry, I'm resilient. This is what compassion fatigue looks like. It's when you are flat on the ground with the weight of your people sitting on top of you, and you have got nothing left. And the very people that you love and care about so deeply, the people that you prayed with, the people that you started with, the people that you believed would be with you to the very end, they are sitting on top of you and you have been flattened. Compassion fatigue has many causes, and it has recently been described in the research as more dangerous than burnout. Now, Galatians 6 helps us understand compassion fatigue from a spiritual, a biblical point of view. Compassion fatigue often comes in when we blur the lines between where we end and where other people begin. Taking responsibility for things that we have no authority in. Responsibility and authority need to go together. You can't have one without the other. It's like a hand in a glove. Compassion fatigue sets in when we confuse loving and caring for people with fixing and changing them. Compassion fatigue sets in when we confuse the process of loving people with our predetermined, expected, successful results for those people. When we think we know better than God, when we think they're our children, not His children. Compassion fatigue sets in when we forget how to hold space for others without losing ourselves. In Galatians 6, verse 2-5, it's an interesting passage. It starts with, carry each other's burdens. The Greek word here for burden refers to a boulder. A boulder is a heavy weight that you cannot carry on your own. I've got 2 boulders outside my office. It took about 15 guys to bring them down our walkway. They could not be carried on their own. They sit outside my office and they're a reminder that my calling is to help people carry their boulders, things that they can't carry on their own. That's my calling. Carry each other's burdens. In this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. But then if you skip down to verse 5, there's an interesting play of words. For each one should carry their own load. Interesting. I'm carrying somebody's burden, but they need to be carrying their own load. If you look at the original Greek word there, the word for load means a knapsack, an everyday load, an everyday responsibility of someone's life that each of us have to carry ourselves. We carry each other's burdens, and each person should carry their own load. Now, there are many causes of compassion fatigue, but I think one of the biggest ones in the church is when we confuse burdens and loads. Galatians doesn't say take responsibility for their burden, take ownership of their burden, and take responsibility of their everyday load as well and work harder on their problem than they are. It doesn't say fix their burden. It doesn't say fix their pain. It simply says carry it with them. When we know the difference between a burden and a load, we can carry burdens with love, without resentment, and without judgment. And perhaps the biggest difference is understanding this for avoiding compassion fatigue. Because the saddest thing about compassion fatigue, the most insidious aspect on slide number 18, Tony, I do slides. Sometimes they work. Are they working? Number 18, slide number 18. The most insidious aspect of compassion fatigue is that it attacks the very core of what brought you to this field. Your empathy, your compassion, your calling to love others well. Now, the second type of expression of joy that I see in Philippians, in Paul's writings, one of my favorite ones, is what I've called cognitive joy. Joy rooted in perspective, or rooted in healthy thinking. Now, one of the biggest joy killers in our lives is not actually what happens to us, but it's how we think about what happens to us. In psychology, we call it the attribution, the meaning, the perspective that we give it, the interpretation that we give it. Notice what Paul says about thinking. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Here's the challenge. Social scientists have identified that humans don't naturally think this way. We are not naturally prone to this positive thinking. Most of us suffer from what has been called in the research cognitive distortions. These are habitual ways of thinking that are actually the opposite of what Paul describes. Cognitive distortions twist and tweak how we see reality, often leading to unnecessary stress, anxiety, and discouragement. Not because of what has happened to us, but because of how we interpret what has happened to us. Somebody leaves your church. I haven't done a good enough job. No, you don't own them. Maybe God wants them somewhere else. Maybe they're growing. Maybe they are in a new season. Guys, I'm not a pastor, so I can say that. Now, we all have a few or some or all of these cognitive distortions to some degree, and so I'm going to put 2 slides up, and your job is to run through them quickly. I'm going to explain them quite briefly, and for you to identify how many of the 10 you suffer from. And if you don't suffer from any of them, I will clearly diagnose you as being in denial. Number 1. All or nothing thinking, black and white, seeing things as either a success or a failure, with no in-betweens and none of the thinking that says, this is good enough for now. I did the best with what I have, and my Heavenly Father is so pleased with me. Overgeneralization, when we believe that one negative response means everything we have ever done is wrong. When I worked for Deloitte, the accounting firm, I remember having an assessment, and this guy was singing my praises. I was amazing. The students loved me. And then he gave me one area for improvement. That was the only thing I could think about for about 3 months. Mental filtering, when we struggle to see the big picture and we notice what is wrong and not what is right. I'm a perfectionist in recovery. This is a big thing for me. A lot of marriages are stuck in mental filtering. You see what's wrong all the time, and you have a confirmation bias because you decided that your house, your spouse or your wife, your husband was like that, and so now it's all you can see. And everything is interpreted through that lens, causing incredible distress in your marriage, instead of going to Paul's thinking, whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good report. Think of those things. Look for the gold. Disqualifying the positive. Ignoring or downplaying or dismissing positive attributes, experiences, achievements, or compliments. We're so bad at this in church. Such a great job this morning. You were phenomenal. You were phenomenal. Oh, no. That would be that. Instead of just going, thank you. You have worked on what God has given you and placed in you and your gifting and your calling, and you have stewarded that with grace, and your preaching is beautiful, and you've worked hard for that. Called and chosen because you were willing to say yes. Don't disqualify the positives. Jumping to conclusion is just as the name describes. It's when we make assumptions on what other people are thinking, sometimes known as the gift of discernment. You don't have a clue what somebody's thinking. And you'll have a lot less stress and anxiety in your life if you just look at what's going on, not assuming what is happening behind the scenes in the head of a person who probably doesn't even know what they're thinking anyway. A good filter for discernment is to check your discerning thoughts to see if they are lovely and admirable, rather than judgmental and harsh. And we're moving right along. Catastrophizing. This is me. Imagining the worst case scenario and believing that it's inevitable. Every time I get on a plane, I will definitely be dying. I love it when I hear the pilot speak. I'm like, I want him to be about 55 male, preferably Afrikaans. It is the most prejudicial, stereotypical part. If it's a woman that speaks, I'm like, is there another plane I can take? So bad. And I'm a competent, capable woman. Should statements. Putting pressure on ourselves with unrealistic expectation. I should have done that. I should not have done that. And it plays like a tape recorder in your head at night, over and over. Emotional reasoning, I love this one. Believing something is true just because you feel that it is. Your feelings are just feelings. They're real inside you, but they're not necessarily true. Labeling. Defining yourself or others negatively, placing a label. He's divorced. She had an affair. No. Labeling is the exact opposite of what the gospel message is. Personalization, taking responsibility for things beyond your control, said every pastor. Not everything is within your control. It's the soil. How beautiful is that? Dealing with our cognitive distortions takes awareness, and it requires thinking about your thinking, which is what we call metacognition. Think about your thinking. Not all your thinking is accurate thinking, just like not all your feelings are accurate. Now, I love this quote by M. Scott Peck, and I think that helping our cognitive distortions can almost be eliminated by this one quote. He starts like this, and he says, life is difficult. Killjoy. So true. Are you in it? Life is difficult. Yes, it sucks sometimes. This is a great truth, one of the greatest truths. It is a great truth because once we truly see this truth, we can transcend it. Once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand it and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because our lens changes. The way we interpret life changes. Because once it is accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. And we don't take it personally anymore, or blame ourselves or someone else. Now, Jesus said the same thing, but a little differently. In John chapter 16:33, he said, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world, there will be trouble. Trouble with a capital T. But take heart. I have overcome the world. Have you noticed how ludicrously honest the Bible is? Sometimes more honest than we are in the pulpit. You see, once we realize that there is trouble in the world, we will be less likely to lose heart, and we can focus on connecting with the one who is overcome when the trouble comes, rather than focusing on the trouble and fighting the trouble. Now, as the story is going to be online, I'm going to end with this, but I'm going to be quite generic with the details. A close family member of mine was recently diagnosed with metastasized, incurable, stage 4 cancer. I haven't known life without him, and so I did what I know to do, and I hit my knees. I prayed incessantly for him, asking God for a miracle, not just for his physical body, but for his soul as well. It was in the beginning stages of the diagnosis with his sickness. It was a hopeless diagnosis, and there was a quick deterioration as it had moved to various parts of his body. And so I surprised him with a visit to his home city. While driving along the beautiful coastline in his convertible, he's the cool member of the family. We had the roof down, and it was a perfect day, but it was riddled with sadness. He said that he wanted to play a song that my husband had sent to him, being relatively unchurched. It was new for him. He was so surprised that I knew the song. And he played it so much in the last couple of weeks that he knew the words off by heart. He played Stand in Your Love by Bethel Music and Josh Baldwin. We began to sing with reckless abandon, not worried about the onlookers. When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. Because fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Cognitive joy. The joy rooted in perspective. With our hands in the air, with the top down, the smell of the ocean, we sang in loud voices. Him with the innocence of being unchurched, not understanding what he was doing, unknowingly, prophetically, declaring life over his life. And then he asked if I knew another song, also new to him. It was The Blessing. And again, we sang with tears streaming down our faces, the beautiful mixture of laughing and crying, declaring life in spite of the facts. And in that moment, I heard a very loud whisper from the Holy Spirit and had a profound encounter. And he spoke these words to me. This is your miracle. You see, we have the facts and we have the truth, and yes, we will have trouble, and yes, we will have peace. And we will have joy in the midst of the suffering and the struggle and before the breakthrough. And we will have encounters, even or especially in the suffering, because he is with us. And he has overcome the world. And this is cognitive joy, the joy rooted in perspective. And the last point, which I'm not going to preach into because Mark already has, is this leads us to what is called defiant joy, which is robbed by disappointment. Defiant joy, the joy that is rooted in the hope of the truth, not in the facts that you know. Defiant joy is not, slide 32, if you can find me. Defiant joy is not the denial of reality, it's the knowledge that joy exists in pain. Defiant joy does not deny pain, explain pain, minimize pain. It feels pain. Defiant joy says, even here, even now, in spite of everything, I know I will be surprised by joy. My prayer for you is this, that you as pastors and leaders will be continuously surprised by joy. That you will be in the middle of nowhere with nobody even around, and you will feel that bubble up inside of you where you encounter joy, the person of Jesus. I pray that in your leading and in your loving, joy would surprise you in unexpected places, in unexpected ways that are unexplainable. That joy will meet you in your suffering and in your celebration. And that you may come to know that joy is not just the reward at the end, but the presence of Jesus with you in the middle of all that you are doing.